So let's go through TSH, free T4, free T3, what you might see on a typical lab, and then maybe what an optimized range looks like.
Yes, 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 yes. This is so important. And I love it when I talk to someone and they say something exactly how I always say it. So I love that. That's why I was laughing. I'm like, I always
Yeah.
say
The H.
that little
The little
H
H.
next to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, right, you don't wanna look at your labs and look for that little H because that's all your doctor is doing. They're doing a quick scan.
That's
They're
their
not
interpretation, by the way. That's like they haven't looked at all the numbers like, how do all these things fit together? They're like, do I have an H or an L? That's it.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's exactly what I said. You have an H or an L.
Yeah.
So you have to look at your own labs. If you're not working with a functional practitioner, you have to look at it through a functional lens. So let's give you those functional lab values. So TSH, I like it below a 2. And I have no problem if someone is on thyroid hormone replacement and let's say they're taking natural desiccated thyroid or anything with T3 or we have liothyronine on board, we know that that TSH is going to go down. So I personally, I don't even freak out if it goes below a 1, below a point 0.5. It all depends on that person and what they're doing to treat their thyroid. But in general, we want that TSH to be below a 2. Free T4, I honestly don't care about because it's just one little piece of the puzzle. And what I found over the years is when I give an optimal free T4, people tend to chase that. And in chasing that, they might continue to increase their T4 medication, which then can increase the reverse T3. So you always have to look at that free T4 and the reverse T3 together because if someone has, let's say, a free T4 of 1.5, and we say, "Oh my gosh, well, that looks great. It's within that normal range. It's actually a little bit closer to the top. Isn't that a good thing?" I go, "It's only a good thing if you're converting your T4 properly over into T3. It's a bad thing if your doctor keeps increasing your dose of T4. Oh, Cindy, you're on 88. Let's take you to 112. Let's take you to 125. Let's take you to 200. And no one is checking your conversion." So free T4, I would say you just you glance at, set it aside, come back to it until you look at those other important lab values. 2 most important ones, free T3, like we mentioned, is the active. I like that in the upper quadrant of the range. And I say upper quadrant because it depends what lab you're using, what country you're in. Those lab ranges can shift and change. Even in the US, from LabCorp to Quest, they're just a little bit different. So if you take that standard lab value range and you cut it into 4, we want you in that upper quadrant or even a little bit over. I have no problem if you get a little H with your free T3 and you tell me, I feel fantastic. Then I'm going to look at that and go, okay, that's great. Then that's your optimal for free T3. Then we move to reverse T3. That's checking your conversion. So that's checking how well do you convert T4 to T3. And let me just throw in here that conversion process, although it is supposed to be very natural, it is built into our body. There are so many things that can impair it. I always say conversion of T4 to T3 for your body is like running 10 Tough Mudders in a row. There's a lot that can get in the way, and especially these days. The toxin exposure that we have these days, estrogen dominance, insulin resistance, which is out the wazoo across our country with the obesity epidemic, lack of nutrients, magnesium, low vitamin D, low selenium, low iodine. There are genetic SNPs now that we're finding that can impair T4 to T3 conversion. So this is why I drive the point home. You must test reverse T3 every single time that you get tested. Now, reverse T3 is not a bad thing. It's built into our bodies as a survival mechanism. So if you were in a car crash, if you were injured, if you were traumatized and you're fighting for your life, you're fighting for your life lying in the ICU, we're going to test your reverse T3 and it's going to be through the roof. And thank God it is because it's your body saying, listen, Steph, as you're lying here, you need to focus all of your energy at healing and surviving. You don't need to lose weight. You don't need to make major decisions. You don't even need to go to the bathroom right now. You need to lie there and survive and heal. The problem is if that reverse T3 is elevated as we're living life day to day and trying to get through our day and run a business and have a family and do all the things, it's putting our body in survival mode. It's telling our body, you don't need to lose weight. You don't need to think. You don't need to have energy. And you're
You
like,
don't need to
wait,
go to the
no, yes, I
bathroom.
do. I would
Yeah.
really
You don't
like
need
to do that.
hair. Yeah.
No, you don't need that
Yeah.
either. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we want to test that reverse T3 every single time. And that we want 12 or less. And I find this is pretty universal. The only lab that I've seen working with patients really in so many different countries, the only country that has a little bit of a wonky reverse T3 lab value is Mexico. And then you just kind of have to look at it and go, okay, what's around the halfway mark? I want to be under that halfway mark of the lab value range. But for
Mhm.
most of us, it's 12 or less. And then we move into the antibodies. So there are two antibodies that we test to see if you have Hashimoto's: TPO, or thyroid peroxidase, or TG, thyroglobulin. And those we want at 0. So I'm going to expand
Mhm.
just really briefly on this because I've even seen this in the functional and integrative space where patients have come to me after seeing another functional doctor who maybe didn't specialize in the thyroid. So they're just kind of going on basic knowledge and they're looking at the labs and they're saying, well, you're, you're, you're at a 20, but the cutoff here is less than 34. So therefore you don't have Hashimoto's. And I go, well, wait, wait,
But you have antibodies. But you
wait,
have
right,
antibodies.
right. You have antibodies,
No.
right? You
No.
have
Yeah.
20 soldiers, i.e., antibodies, attacking your thyroid. So, who made the 34? So, we're going to wait until you have 35 antibodies to officially diagnose you with Hashimoto's. Meanwhile, between having 20 antibodies when we discovered it and 35 antibodies where you get diagnosed, you might gain an extra 20 pounds. You might have lost your job because you can't think anymore. Like, that's silly to wait until someone has that little H or the little red.
Right. Right.
Let's
It's like
address it now.
roll that back. How that's nonsensical to me. And it's also, dare I say it, it's a little bit like gaslighting. It's like there's nothing wrong with you. It's
Mhm.
only when you get to 34 that there's a problem. But you're at 24. So I don't know what you're complaining about. Like just go and live your like it's a little bit like it's all in your head. It's that sort of all in your head, suck it up buttercup kind of attitude. And of course we know with autoimmunity in general, but certainly with Hashimoto's thyroiditis, men get it, but the vast majority of individuals with Hashimoto's are women. And that's never happened in the medical system before, where women have been told that their symptoms don't matter and that they're not great. Like that's never happened, right? I mean, that's not been your experience, has it? This is sarcasm, by the way, in case it's not completely obvious.
Right,
Like,
right.
shut up. Like 20 is not a problem. 0 is not a problem. Anything more than 0, it's like, how much mercury would you like in your body?
Right,
You know?
right.
I'd like 0. I'd like 0 in my body. How much lead would you I'd like 0. 0 would be fine. Anything more than that I have a problem with. The same is true for antibodies. I want 0 of those. I don't want my body attacking itself.
No, no, that's never good. That's never good. And medical gaslighting is huge. I mean, I experienced it 25 years ago. I heard all of those things, everything that you just said, that it's all in your head. It's not a big deal. I was told to eat less and exercise more, the whole thing. And I still hear that from my patients today who are still hearing it from their doctors today, 25 years later.
I hear it from my community every week in our support email. We have women, they're like, my doctor is refusing to run because we have a lab guide that we have. And it's
Mhm.
like, in there, it's like, look for the TP, look for all the antibodies. And it's like, they don't. And in part, and I think that it's changing. And this is not just a poo poo on the MDs. Okay. We love MDs. I have many friends who are like MDs who are friends. But I'll say that unfortunately, the standard of care, like their prescribing ability doesn't change. Like whether or not you have a TPO or thyroglobulin, like they're still just going to give you Synthroid. Like they're not, like what they're going to do isn't going to change. So in some ways, they don't actually care whether or not you have those or not. It doesn't change their approach to this. Like they just have like the script. Like they just have the script for level. They just have the script.
Well, what's really
So
interesting too is that's what they've learned. So years ago, I gave a talk to a group of integrative wellness doctors, and they wanted me to come in and deep dive on the thyroid. So I was talking about the importance of reverse T3 testing and why we do that, like we just went over. And then I talked about the standard of care. I called it the Synthroid box. Why are you in the Synthroid box? And I said, it's interesting if someone comes in with Depression. You'll give them an antidepressant. If that one doesn't work, you're going to give them another one. And if that one doesn't work, you're going to tag on Abilify or some benzo, and you'll keep stacking until you make them feel better. But someone comes in with a thyroid problem and you give them one medication when there are plenty of others out there in different combinations that we can personalize for that patient. Why is that? And the one doctor raises his hand and goes, "That's all we've learned." So literally, it's like you can fault them, but not. Yes, that is all they've learned in medical school. And I think that's a shame. But then after you get out and you're on your start branching out and learning more. And kudos to that group for wanting to learn more, but that's rare. Most docs fall into the standard of care and they do what they've learned, and that is it.
And in some cases, Synthroid is a lifesaver, right? Like if you truly are not producing enough T4 and assuming, like you said, that you can do the 10 tough mutters and you can convert the T4 to 3, maybe it is just a supply issue, right? So that does work in a small subset of
Mhm,
the thyroid, on the thyroid issue on the spectrum, right?
mhm.
Maybe we can talk a little bit. You mentioned it, but I thought maybe we could double click on it. My understanding, and you can expand on this certainly, is that about 60% of our T4 is converted in the liver to T3. But there's other, like you said, there's 10 tough mutters that someone might need to, like, what are some of the conversion issues? Let's say whether it's in the liver, and you mentioned insulin resistance, so that makes a lot of sense. But what are some of the reasons why there might be a conversion issue from inactive 4 to active T3?
Right, right, right. So when we look at where is T4 converted, like you said, the liver is one, the gut,
Mm,
peripheral tissues, and even the
mhm.
thyroid gland itself. So that opens up a whole other discussion for thyroidectomy patients. I always say to
Muscles as
them,
well? Do you see it in the muscles, the conversion in the muscles?
that's a great question. Not that they kind of lump it into peripheral tissue. So I
Yeah.
would have to dig deeper into that to see if the muscles are one because oh, I'm gonna look at that because if it is, that up levels our discussion on how important it is to keep your muscle on
Mhm.
and how it really is the organ of longevity. But I'm not sure about that. But when we're talking about conversion, so it T4 to T3 conversion happens in all those locations, including the thyroid gland. So if you don't have a thyroid gland, that just removed one place of conversion. So that kind of increases your chances of not converting properly. But when we look at all of the factors that come in, there's so many factors, like we mentioned. Okay, insulin resistance. Estrogen dominance is interesting because I get this question a lot from women who say, well, if I go on BHRT therapy and I'm taking estrogen, is that going to affect my thyroid? So it's important to unpack that. No, actually, hormones and having proper levels of hormones, progesterone, estrogen, testosterone, very protective of the thyroid, actually protective of autoimmune as well, turning on. So that's one reason why women get more autoimmune than men because men have more testosterone, is very protective. When we're looking at that estrogen dominance, yes, as a menopausal woman, we know as you're moving from perimenopause to menopause, your estrogen can kind of be on a roller coaster. We could test you one day and you are estrogen dominant, and we test you 2 days later and then you're not. You have zero estradiol. So you're kind of on a roller coaster. But those little bursts of estrogen, that's not going to impair T4 to T3 conversion. But if you're walking around in that estrogen dominant state, and this happens a lot more in perimenopause, where your progesterone tanks first, but you're still making adequate estrogen. Now, that estrogen, total estrogen, or even estradiol is not necessarily going to be flagged high on your lab, but because you're low in progesterone, and progesterone immensely helps with T4 to T3 conversion. It's such a beautiful helper with conversion. Now you are in a low progesterone, estrogen dominant state, and that's going to impair things. Nutrient deficiencies, magnesium, iodine is the big one.